We're going to now have the David Leighton lecture here every year. And I am pleased to be able to introduce Admiral Shumaker, who is from Pennsylvania. He attended Northwestern for a year before he went off to the Naval Academy. He was a finalist in the Apollo program, but a minor brief medical mishap threw him out of that, so he had to continue on in the Navy. But he did, in '64, graduate with a master's degree in aeronautical engineering from postgraduate school, and then joined VF 154. Shortly after the birth of his son, he was shot down over North Vietnam and spent the next 8 years as a prisoner of war. POWs considered him as a resistor, a leader, and a patriot. I think those are wonderful characterizations. After he was repatriated, he got back working hard again in the Navy, got a doctorate degree in electrical engineering. As a captain, he was the program manager for smart missiles. Then he was promoted to admiral, became superintendent of the Naval Postgraduate School, and then went on to coordinate research efforts in the Pentagon. When he retired in 1989, he taught at George Washington University and was an associate dean out at the University of North Dakota. So he's a famous man in many respects, a man of great courage, a man of great endurance, and he has some remarkable things to tell us here. But I think
thanks very much, this introduction may be longer than my speech, but I hope you're enjoying your tour around the museum as much as I am today. You know, once an aviator, always an aviator, so with minor apologies, you know, I just really enjoy the aviation aspects of this museum. The ready room brings back a lot of memories. I'm joined by some fellow, what we call cons here. Ken Koski, I think, is in the audience, and also Fred Crow. So we'll slip each other a secret handshake here afterwards. But, you know, I think a museum like this is the result of a lot of caring people, such as you and your predecessors, but especially with leadership from such people as Admiral Holloway and Admiral Dunn and Admiral DeMars. You know, it's a labor of love, and I'm sure it's been a passion that's driven their lives and really produced this magnificent museum. Now, I hope you'll excuse me from looking at my notes here, but I had an 80th birthday here recently, and so your memory slides a little bit here, so I'm going to consult these notes. But I've got a confession to make, and that is that as a youth, I never really cared for museums. You know, to me they were kind of dusty, dull things where you stored old relics. But happily, I've changed my mind. Maybe I've matured, hopefully, because they're really an acknowledgement of the contributions of past generations and an inspiration to the new succeeding generations. You know, they're tied to the past and a hope to the future, and they certainly have a strong educational theme. And as Admiral DeMars said here just a bit ago, that's going to be a thrust of his, education, and particularly an attempt to interest more younger people in what's going on in the Navy and in this museum. Well, I'm really honored to give the David Leighton address here. And Mr. Leighton is in the audience. I've not yet met him, but I think many of you know that he and his past wife, have been very, very generous to this museum. Sir, we really thank you for that generosity, because that's what has kept this museum going. Well, I'd also like to introduce, I was going to say an old friend, but I'll say a long-term friend of mine named Bob Mitchell. He's in the front row here. And Bob is a retired Navy doctor who 40 years ago, upon our release, set up a clinic in Pensacola, Florida, in which he has probed and examined and compared all these POWs and their counterparts, and I'm very indebted to him. But I think he would be the first to announce that most of these people are past the test. They're relatively sane. The present company accepted perhaps, but anyway, Bob has really helped us a lot in the last 40 years. Well, now, if you were to ask, what's it like to be a POW, and you were to ask someone along the street, the young guy would say, well, it must be like that television series, Hogan's Heroes, where the American POWs were always playing jokes and tricks on the German guards. But if you were to ask an older person, they'd remember photographs they saw of emaciated prisoners from the Bataan death march. But in Vietnam, it was really nothing like that, because in Vietnam, they were very, very sophisticated in psychological warfare. And their whole theme and technique was to take a prisoner and isolate them and not allow them to communicate or talk to any other prisoners. And consequently, they reasoned that by pumping a lot of propaganda through a loudspeaker in their cells, they could convert some of the people into their line of thinking. To use their phraseology, make people cross over to the people's side. And they weren't very successful, though. One of my good fortunes was that I had a cellmate for a number of years. I'm sure a lot of you people recognize Jim Stockdale. And he was quite a leader over there, but he used to remind me that his interrogator would remind him that, he said, Stockdale, we are not capable of beating you on the battlefield. But he says, we're going to win this war, and we're going to win this war on the streets of New York City and Los Angeles and other places, and you, Stockdale and others, are going to be part of this. Well, it didn't work out that way so much for them, but you can see where their emphasis was. I'm reading my notes again. What really helped thwart the Vietnamese efforts was this communication system that we developed by tapping on the walls, and therefore we were able to establish contact and help each other and counteract the propaganda that was being forced down our throats. I'd like to also acknowledge that the contributions of a fellow POW named Mike McGrath. He discovered that he had a latent artistic talent over there. Actually, in solitary confinement, he had a lot of boils and they oozed blood and pus. And so he was able to take those fluids and draw a ram's head on the wall of the cell. And he went on with his artistic career by memorizing certain scenes, and then upon his release, he published them. And so you're going to see in a short time a 6-minute film on the other side of the museum that has some of McGrath's drawings in it, and they're quite descriptive. And by the way, I think the smartest thing I ever learned in the Navy was never to get in between a sailor and the chow line. So I realized they have a nice buffet set up over here, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks short here. But the story, I think, of the POWs is a story of survival and a victory in the human spirit. We wanted to return home, of course, but we wanted to return with honor. And so that was our mantra, return with honor. Well, it's been 40 years since our release, and you might ask yourself, well, why in the world, or what value would something that happened 40 years ago be of value to us today? But I think we did learn some things. There were 591 prisoners that were released in the spring of 1973, and 25% of them were Navy officers. But I'm here to tell you, again with some parochialism, that more than 25% of the leadership of this group, I think, it came from the Navy officers, people like Stockdale and Denton Bill Lawrence and others. And I reflect on that a bit, and I think it's a result of our Navy philosophy of can-do. That seemed to prevail and help our leaders over there. Well, obviously, we did make it back, and we retained our honor, and most of us went on to careers that were successful. You know, some became admirals, some generals, doctors, lawyers, pastors, and even some politicians. But you know, I learned a lot about myself in Vietnam and how to cope with stress. And you don't have to be a POW to undergo stress. You know, everyone in this room has undergone stress of some form, and there's probably more stress to overcome. But I learned about 7 lessons over there, 7 take-homes, and one of them is it's really important to communicate. Certainly, we have better means than just tapping through walls now with your iPhones and iPads, but it's really important to get your thoughts out and to listen to other people's thoughts. You know, I'm sure how that the reason this museum got to be so elegant is that they bounced ideas back and forth. It's not just a one-man operation. A second thing I learned in coping was you've got to keep the faith. You know, keep the faith in your country, in God, in the Navy, in yourself, and that helped get us through. I learned to really reinforce my belief that our governmental system of democracy is the best that's yet been invented, and I've learned that our economic system of free enterprise really promotes individual risk-taking and motivation. I also learned that the human body, doesn't take a whole lot of nourishment. You know, we got by on cabbage soup and not a whole lot more, and yet we survived. So I guess you don't need fillets to get by. I learned too that the power of the human brain is immense. You know, more than you give it credit for. We're probably only using 10% of it because we were able to reconstitute logarithmic tables and all kinds of engineering backgrounds, and in memory, you're capable of memorizing gigabytes. I guess I have stories to amplify each of these, but I've been asked to find my remarks in about 10 minutes, so maybe at lunch you can ask me some of these things. I learned the importance of humor, and you know, you've always got to look for the light side of things. And even in the grim realities of imprisonment, you know, you can always find some humor. I'll tell you some stories about that later on, time permitting. And finally, what I learned as a coping mechanism is never give up. You know, be like a boxer that occasionally gets knocked down, but gets up off the canvas and gets ready for the next round. And that's what happened to us. We get tortured. We have to give more than just name, rank, serial number, date of birth. But anyway, we're back in business again. The Vietnamese, you know, never went along with the Geneva Convention, which is supposed to protect prisoners' lives. They're not supposed to be tortured or starved or extorted, but they didn't go along with that at all. So in closing, let me say that, you know, we all experience stress, and it's not exclusive to POWs, but I've tried to convey to you some of the ways that we tried to overcome this period of imprisonment. And some of you may wonder, you know, if you, in your own minds, you probably wonder, well, could you have survived this kind of treatment? And what I want to do in closing is to assure you that everyone in this room could indeed survive. And the reason why is because, you know, you've been exposed to a country that values freedom and respect and opportunity to be productive in your lives. And so I assure you that you too could survive and come home with them. You may wonder how the place got named the Hanoi Hilton, which incidentally is a 5-star hotel now. I've been there for about 3 months, without in solitary confinement, without contact with any American. And I had a little hole through this door, a little wormhole, and I was able to survey part of the courtyard. And every day they'd open the cell door and we'd carry our sanitation buckets out to 75 yards away or so and dump them. And so I noticed after 3 months that there was another American that would follow me. And so I took a chance and I wrote a note on toilet paper and some ink that I'd reconstituted by someone had spilled some ink on the floor probably 10 years before me, and I poured water on it, got back some consistency there. And I left him this note just trying to cheer him up. And I simply said, "Welcome to the Hanoi Hilton." And then I added on, "If you get this note, scratch your ear on the way back." And I told the advisory council I cleaned up the story a little bit for the audience. But nonetheless, he was scratching away when he came back, and what a wonderful feeling it is to be able to reestablish contact with a fellow American. And that's how we got started on this tap code business and all. And I'll close with one other story, maybe two. But anyway, most of these guys were pilots and officers, but there was one guy from Clark, South Dakota. He was an E2, one step up from the bottom in the Navy in rank. And I don't think they know how to spell Navy out there in South Dakota. But anyway, this guy was a wonderful guy, and he had a photographic memory, and so he memorized all the names of the 591 POWs. And the Vietnamese, propaganda effort would occasionally try to release 3 people at a time. And Hegdell said, was the guy's name, said, "No, he's not going to accept it." Well, his senior guy at that camp said, "No, you have all this information," because not only had he remembered the names of all these prisoners, and that was important because the Vietnamese only released about 1 out of 3 names, and consequently, there were a lot of wives that remarried, and it's kind of a sad story. So it was important to get these names out. So Hegel not only memorized the names, he remembered the hometowns of the people, their next of kin, the telephone numbers. It's a marvelous bit of memory. And so he did indeed go home, and while his 2 compatriots got their wives in their back bay and went off on vacation, Hegel got a ticket, a bus ticket. Remember the tickets you could buy and take out with Greyhound all the way around the United States? That's what he did, and he called these people and talked to them. So every time you see, some young guy walking down the street with his pants hanging halfway down and his hat on backwards, don't give up on those guys. Maybe there's a Hegel among them. And I guess the last thing I'll tell you is about at the very last 2 years, there was a rescue attempt, and it was unsuccessful, but it did cause the Vietnamese to bring us all together into one room that was about half the size of this, and there were 75 of us in there. And what we really looked forward to was every Saturday night we'd have movies, but not the movies that you might imagine, because we didn't have a projector, we didn't have a film, we didn't have a screen. What we had was John McCain, who had a great memory for movies, and he would sit in the middle of this group of 75 and relate stories, and they sometimes take longer than the actual movie took to do. But after our release, I happened to be in a motel in San Diego. Another friend of mine was there, and we agreed to meet for breakfast in the morning. So he came down, and he was kind of bleary-eyed and irritated, and I said, "Well, what's the matter?" And he said he couldn't sleep the night before, so he turned on the television set and watched a movie. And I said, "Well, that explains why you're bleary-eyed, but why are you upset?" He said, "It was McCain's movie called The Quiet Man with John Wayne, and it was nothing at all like McCain." I think